I wonder if that brat in your belly is okay, haha. For a moment, I couldn't understand what had happened, but when I heard my mother-in-law's voice, my recent memories came flooding back. I had come to pick up the gardening tools from the garage, and she had crashed her car into me. What's more, judging from the words I heard, this didn't seem like an accident. What on earth are you doing? I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move since my consciousness was hazy. In such a situation, most people would worry about their own life, but as a pregnant woman, with a due date just a week away, I was more concerned about the baby in my belly. However, aside from worrying, there was nothing I could do, and I lost consciousness. I regained consciousness in the hospital. When I looked towards my husband, who was calling my name, I saw a baby sleeping, and I noticed that my belly had shrunk. Apparently, I had given birth while unconscious. I was disappointed to have given birth without being aware, but I was relieved that the baby was safe. Furthermore, it seemed like my body was fine, as I was discharged 2 weeks later. However, I couldn't celebrate the safe arrival of the baby and my discharge without reservation. I still had to confront my mother-in-law, so I headed to my in-laws' house in my husband's car. As I seethed with anger inside the car, I spotted my mother-in-law crossing the pedestrian crossing just before we reached their house. She had put my baby in danger, and I couldn't forgive that. I decided that she would have to face the consequences, even if it meant her descent into hell. I am 28 years old and was a full-time housewife until recently when I worked as a company employee. I resigned from my job when I found out I was pregnant. I did have the desire to continue working, but since I live with my mother-in-law, I had to give up my job. My mother-in-law had a husband who was 4 years older than her. She divorced when Gail was in elementary school, and after he started working and moved out, she lived on her own. My mother-in-law is 60 years old. She's still healthy for now, but she might need support in the future. That's why, as a decision related to marriage, we chose to live together with my in-laws. Even after my childbirth and settling into parenting, I might inconvenience my workplace with my mother-in-law's care needs. Not wanting to cause any trouble at work, I decided to quit my job. Thank you. Now both our child and mom can feel at ease. I'm sorry for making you quit your job for my sake. My husband and mother-in-law were grateful for my decision to quit my job. What are you both saying? We're a family, so supporting each other is only natural, right? Besides, once things settle down with childcare, I plan to look for part-time work. 3 months after quitting my job, I've been living a peaceful life without any major issues. As a pregnant woman, experiencing a trouble-free and peaceful life is the greatest happiness for me. However, as 5 months pass since becoming pregnant, and my belly gradually grows, my mother-in-law's behavior starts to change. Hey! Isn't this miso soup too strong? Are you trying to make me sick or something? These kinds of complaints have become a daily occurrence. Is it too strong? I'm sorry. I thought it was the same as always. I'll make it lighter next time. You became a full-time housewife, so it's only natural for you to handle household chores perfectly. Just because you're pregnant doesn't mean you can be lazy. When my husband goes to work and it's just the two of us, my mother-in-law starts nagging and tries to push household chores onto me as a pregnant woman. I wonder why this typical mother-in-law harassment has started. I can't think of anything, but did I inadvertently do something that upset my mother-in-law? I considered talking to her or discussing it with my husband, but ideally, I didn't want any trouble in the house before childbirth. Fortunately, my mother-in-law's harassment wasn't severe, so I decided to let it slide and endure it until the birth. However, it seems like this decision was a mistake. Hey, you're in the way! Your big belly is getting in the way! 1 month after my mother-in-law's harassment began, it was still ongoing. In fact, instead of stopping, it seemed like my nonchalant attitude towards it bothered her, and the harassment escalated. Sadie, please be careful! Your belly is in the way. I don't even want a grandchild. You should just get rid of it. In the hallway and, even while using the bathroom, my mother-in-law started deliberately bumping into me and pushing me, saying my belly was in the way. She even went as far as saying she didn't want a grandchild. Was she serious about not wanting a grandchild? Regardless of her true intentions, if I were to be pushed and fell due to her actions, it could be dangerous. In fact, I had already been pushed by her a few times and almost fell. So, despite enduring it until now, I decided to talk to my husband about my mother-in-law's harassment. My husband did talk to my mother-in-law, but instead of stopping the harassment, she escalated it further, thinking she had been reported. Why should I be resented so much by my mother-in-law, just for seeking help from my husband? Household chores were now completely dumped on me, the nagging increased, and she became more forceful in pushing and bumping into me. I considered having my husband talk to her again, but it could be dangerous to pour fuel on the fire, causing further escalation of the harassment. I couldn't afford for the harassment to escalate further and turn into direct violence. Therefore, I decided to spend the remaining time until childbirth, protecting myself and my unborn baby. 4 months have passed since then, and my due date is just 1 week away. Somehow, I managed to endure the harassment, and it seems I'll be able to give birth. But by thinking that way, I let my guard down. I had been cleaning the garden twice a week. I wasn't cleaning the garden because it was dirty, but rather for some light exercise. The gardening tools like brooms and dustpans are stored in the back of the garage. When I went to the garage to get the cleaning tools, it seemed like my mother-in-law was planning to go somewhere, because she was sitting in the driver's seat of the car. I considered waiting until the car left, but my mother-in-law was rummaging through her bag, showing no signs of starting the car. Therefore, I decided to go and get the cleaning tools. The space between the garage wall and the car was narrow. It might not have felt so tight if my belly weren't so big, but with childbirth looming, it was a bit uncomfortable. I squeezed past the side of the car and retrieved the cleaning tools from behind it. That's when the car's engine started. If she had just waited for me to leave the garage, she wouldn't have to expose me to exhaust fumes and harass me again, I thought. The next moment, I found myself lying on the ground. I guess that brat in your belly is gone now, haha. Grandchildren would be a hassle anyway. In that fleeting moment, I couldn't understand what had happened, but when I heard my mother-in-law's voice, my recent memories came flooding back. She had reversed the car and rammed into me. Moreover, judging from the words I heard, this didn't seem like an accident. Until now, I had thought that, as long as my baby in my belly was safe, I could endure any harassment. However, this time it was clear that she was targeting the life of my baby. This was absolutely unacceptable. What on earth are you doing? I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move since my consciousness was hazy. In a situation like this, most people would be worried about their own lives, but I was more concerned about the baby in my belly. I wondered if the baby was okay. If I were to lose my life, would the baby be able to survive? I remember thinking about various things, but apart from worrying, there was nothing else I could do, and I lost consciousness. When I regained consciousness, I was in a hospital room. "Are you okay?" "I'm so relieved." My head was still a bit fuzzy, and I couldn't quite remember the situation. I was wondering why I was lying in a hospital bed when I noticed that a baby was sleeping next to me. There was a slight pain in my abdomen. It seemed that I had given birth while unconscious. My husband explained the situation to me as I struggled to comprehend it. It appeared that I had been immediately transported by an ambulance after being hit by the car. It seemed that the broom and dustpan I had hastily grabbed had provided some form of protection. However, the impact of the accident had caused placental abruption. Placental abruption can cut off the baby's blood and oxygen supply, so they performed an emergency cesarean section at the hospital. Both the baby and I had somehow survived, and it was now the day after the accident. I was disappointed that I had given birth while unconscious, but as long as the baby was safe, I was fine with it. "I received a call that you were taken away in an ambulance, and I was really surprised." My thoughts gradually cleared, and I started recalling various things. "Who called the ambulance for me?" "I think it was just me and your mother, in the garage, right?" "Huh?" "My mother called the ambulance. She apparently mistook the accelerator for the brake." "Your mother said that?" "It must be a lie." Since her target was not my life but the baby's, my mother-in-law immediately called an ambulance and the police to handle it as an accident. She also informed my husband that it was an accident. Well, I couldn't say she was aiming for the baby. I told my husband the last words I heard from my mother-in-law before losing consciousness. "I guess that brat in your belly is gone now, haha. Grandchildren would be a hassle anyway." My consciousness was hazy, but I remembered these words clearly because they were shocking. It was definitely not a misunderstanding. Hearing my story, my husband also seemed shocked. "For now, let's put aside what my mother did and focus on your recovery. I'll handle the rest." In the end, due to the injuries from the accident, I couldn't be discharged until 2 weeks later. It was considered a relatively fast recovery. During these 2 weeks, my husband and I discussed our future course of action, and he carried out the decisions we had made together. Furthermore, when my husband returns home, he'll have to face my mother-in-law, but we can't let her know about our plans. So, I only informed her about my physical condition and gave the excuse that, due to the accident, I didn't want to see my mother-in-law yet, to make sure she wouldn't visit. On the day I was discharged from the hospital, I headed to my in-laws' house in my husband's car to confront my mother-in-law. As I seethed with anger in the car, I spotted my mother-in-law crossing the pedestrian walkway, just before arriving at my in-laws' house. "I hope she experiences the same thing. Just crash into her already." I wanted to say that, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. My husband noticed my mother-in-law and honked to get her attention. "Hey! Where are you going?" "I told you to wait at home." "It was faster than I thought, you know? I was planning to go grocery shopping while Gail was at the hospital." "Forget about that. Get in the car quickly. There's something more important to discuss than dinner." I looked at my mother-in-law and my anger escalated. I hadn't even realized it, but at that moment, my voice was quite loud, and my expression was significantly intimidating. I don't think I've ever expressed such strong anger in my life. My mother-in-law, overwhelmed by my anger, quietly got into the car, and we drove back to my in-laws' house. "We're leaving this house." Once we arrived at my in-laws' house and began our discussion, I immediately confronted my mother-in-law with the conclusion. "Wait! What's going on all of a sudden? Are you angry about the accident? It was just a mix-up between the accelerator and the brake. I'm old too, so it couldn't be helped, right? So, you'll forgive me, won't you? That wasn't an accident, it was deliberate, right? You were targeting my baby in my belly, weren't you? I heard your words." My mother-in-law, seeing me not reacting, and assuming I was unconscious, seemed to have believed that I wasn't aware of what was happening at that moment. Until now, my husband hasn't conveyed anything to my mother-in-law, except for information about my physical condition, so it was news to me that my mother-in-law knew I was conscious. Clearly, there was a sense of urgency in her expression. "You heard my words? But, were you sure that your consciousness was clear? And even if you heard it, there's no evidence, right? There could be the possibility of your misconception, or false accusations, couldn't there? Gail, would you believe such words?" Did she think it would be disadvantageous to talk to me? My mother-in-law turned the conversation towards my husband. "Mom, haven't you bullied your daughter-in-law before? There have been instances of violent behavior, and you've even told her to get an abortion, right? Are you asking me to believe the words of a mother like that? Why did you dislike me, having a baby so much, Sadie?" I asked a question I had avoided until now, to avoid causing any trouble before childbirth. "A grandchild is nothing but a burden in terms of time and money." My mother-in-law had been divorced in her younger years, and had raised my husband on her own, so she didn't have much money. With the birth of a grandchild, there would be celebrations for birthdays and other events, which she felt obligated to contribute to as a grandmother. She thought she wouldn't be able to buy things, like school bags or study desks, and that it would make her feel miserable. Additionally, having raised my husband on her own, she didn't want to go through the hardships of childcare again. I had planned to work part-time once childcare settled down, so she thought I would push the responsibility of taking care of the grandchild onto her. My mother-in-law was happy when she found out about my pregnancy, but as she saw my belly getting bigger, these feelings grew stronger, leading her to engage in bullying. As the due date for the birth approached, my mother-in-law seemed to believe that the grandchild was about to be born. She apparently devised a plan to target the baby's life by driving her car into me. I had decided to do yard work twice a week, so the crime would be relatively easy to commit. I understand your feelings, Sadie. But I will never forgive you for targeting the baby. No matter how much you cry and beg, we will leave. I will go back to my parents' house with the baby, and my husband has already arranged for a weekly apartment and is preparing to leave this house. Mom, it's unfortunate, but that's how it is. For now, we'll move out of this house, and we've made preparations until we find a new place. During the 2 weeks we were in the hospital, we prepared to move out of the house. That's right, it's my fault, so there's no choice. I understand. My mother-in-law, knowing that we had already made preparations, gave in without resistance. She seemed to consider our leaving as a way to atone for her actions. However, after being targeted for my baby, I couldn't forgive her with just that. Are you trying to end the conversation by yourself? The conversation isn't over yet. In fact, we're just getting started, you know? What else is there? My mother-in-law seemed unaware that there was more to discuss. You hit me with your car, didn't you? You will pay compensation for that. Compensation? You didn't say anything for 2 weeks, so why now? It's only natural after causing an accident. Did she think nothing would happen if she didn't say anything? There's no statute of limitations for settling traffic accidents. The deadline for claiming damages in personal injury accidents is also 5 years, so it's okay for us not to contact you for 2 weeks. Did you think that because we're family, you could relax? I haven't said anything until now, because I needed to confirm that there wouldn't be any after effects on my body and the baby. Later, a lawyer will contact you, so we won't go into too much detail, but based on the nature of the accident and injuries, the compensation could be around $28,000. My mother-in-law, abandoned by us, was also told that she might have to pay $28,000 all of a sudden. Her face turned pale upon hearing this possibility. My mother-in-law is only covered by mandatory liability insurance, and I know that. The insurance likely covers up to $9,600, so my mother-in-law will have to pay the remaining $18,400 out of pocket. Furthermore, my mother-in-law doesn't have much money. The family lives in a rented house, and her car is a used compact car. She doesn't have any significant assets. Therefore, my mother-in-law will have to find work at the age of 60 to pay off the debt. Given the current situation, it will be tough. At first, I consulted with a lawyer to see if there could be any charges, such as bodily harm or abortion, because my mother-in-law intentionally rammed her car into me. However, it was difficult without evidence. Nevertheless, when I heard about the compensation I could claim, I thought it would be adequate payback, so I decided to pursue a legitimate claim for compensation from the accident. Now, I'll have to live a difficult life on my own, and I can't afford that money. Look, in a few years, I might need home care services. You're leaving the house, but we're still family, right? You won't say something so cruel, will you? Now, my mother-in-law suddenly mentioned the word family. Somebody who tried to harm my baby's life can't be considered family, right? Gail, you won't abandon me, will you? I raised you with all my might. My mother-in-law redirected the conversation from me to my husband once again. I do appreciate you're raising me as a single mother. But Mom, you went too far. I hold more resentment towards you for targeting my child's life than gratitude for raising me. After my husband pushed her away with these words, my mother-in-law fell into a state of shock and stopped talking. Since she stopped speaking, we considered the conversation over and left the house with only the essentials. I felt a little sorry for my mother-in-law, but considering that she had targeted my baby's life, this outcome was her own doing. Until we found a new place, I went to my parents' house, and my husband stayed in a weekly apartment. The day after leaving my in-laws' house, my mother-in-law started calling us. Her messages included requests for forgiveness and pleas for us to return. We had no intention of forgiving her, so we always rejected her words and hung up the phone. However, since she continued to call persistently, my husband and I blocked her calls altogether. My husband didn't tell my mother-in-law the location of his weekly apartment, and I highly doubted that she would come to my parents' house or call me. By eliminating the means of contact between her and my husband and me, my mother-in-law gave up and started looking for work. However, at the age of 60, with limited job options, she initially started working at a nearby restaurant as a part-time employee. However, my mother-in-law, who had poor memory and was slow at work, was treated as a nuisance, and she felt uncomfortable. She quit the job quickly. Additionally, she apparently spilled hot soup or boiling water from a large pot onto her thigh and suffered burns, preventing her from working. Moreover, she seemed to have difficulty walking, whether due to the pain from the burn or because her skin felt tight. However, if her daily movements weren't affected, She had no choice but to work. We had abandoned her, and she had to pay me compensation. We encouraged her to work even if she didn't want to. She should accept it, endure it, and once her burns have healed, we hoped she'd find work again. Meanwhile, my husband and I were searching for a new home where we could live with our child. We were debating between renting or taking the plunge and buying a house. Considering our child's future, it's a happy thing to be able to think about our future life.